Hey, it's Jessica Honegger, founder of the socially conscious fashion brand Noonday Collection. Welcome to the Going Scared podcast. Just get ready for today's conversation. I can't wait for you to listen in with my guest today. It's Mary Marantz. Mary is an author, speaker, educator, and a photographer, and her works has been featured in publications including Martha Stewart, Style Me Pretty, and more. Mary is one of those people. She's my kind of people. She's our people. I'm so excited for you to hear from her today. So today I wanted to sit down with Mary because she has such an incredible story of grit. She actually grew up in a humble home. She describes it as a dirt floor home in West Virginia, coal mining country with a coal mining father. And she took those lessons that she learned from growing up all the way to Yale Law School and eventually to start her own entrepreneurial endeavors as a photographer, an educator, and a speaker, and a soon-to-be writer. I really enjoyed our conversation because we talk about how easy it is to tell ourselves stories, especially about our belonging, based on how we grew up. But I love how she told herself a story of belonging at Yale and how she really used those connections from Yale to help launch her photography business. I know I learned a lot from today's episode that I wasn't necessarily expecting to learn, and you're going to do the same. Hey, Mary, welcome to today's episode of Going Scared.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm so excited. And when I sort of got the email to come on, I just couldn't believe it. So I'm so pumped to talk today.
Well, I'm excited too. I have worked with a lot of photographers over the years, shooting our lookbooks, international. I'm actually leaving for Haiti this weekend to go with a photographer to Haiti. And I just have a deep admiration for photographers, and just you are amazing. Your Instagram feed is beautiful. And so I want to get to know a little bit more about your story. And can you give us just a Cliff Notes version of how you landed to where you are today?
I grew up in West Virginia. That's a huge part of who I am from 0 to 18. I grew up in kind of very super rural, top of a mountain, in a trailer, kind of like a little lean-to shack on the side. Just my dad's a logger. My grandfather was a coal miner. We have 8 generations of loggers in my family. I was the first in my family to go to college. And so just very, very small town. Like we literally are one of those towns that had one stoplight, most of the time, when it was working, we had one stoplight and there was a Go Mart and a Mountaineer Mart and one grocery store and a high school. And that's basically the town I grew up in. And we weren't even in the town. We were on the mountain outside of town where they would bring about 5 mountains down into the valley to have enough kids to make a high school. There were about 130 kids in my high school class. So just super small town. And I stayed in West Virginia for college, and then I did a year abroad, and then I started applying to law school because when you go to college for political science and philosophy, there's not a lot you can do with that except go get a master's in philosophy, and there's not a lot you can do with that except teach or go to law school. And so that's what I did, that's what brought me to Connecticut, where I live now. And I did 3 years at Yale Law School, which I always tell people is a really expensive way to become a wedding photographer. Don't recommend that route necessarily, but I wouldn't change that for the world because I did do the full 3 years and I graduated and I use that law background all the time in our business. But the biggest thing is that while I was in New Haven, I met and fell in love with a photographer, my husband, Justin, and eventually photography. And so when I graduated law school, I had law firm offers in London and New York for $140,000 plus bonuses and benefits to start. And we instead decided to leap, believing the net would appear. I think it's so appropriate. We're talking about going scared. Leap and the net would appear, not knowing at all what we were doing about being business owners. But that was 10 years ago in September. And so that kind of brings us to where we are now, is just full time in our business for the last decade.
Wow. I majored in Latin American studies. So right there with you, where it's like, what on earth do you do with that? And then really didn't know that that would actually come into play eventually in my life.
Yeah.
But I want to back up just a second because Yale's legit. Yale is real. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that you got to know at Yale might have been really different than how you grew up. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your internal process, because I know for me, I would tell myself a lot of stories. Like I own a fashion brand, but I'm a size 10. And I would tell myself a story that those two didn't go together. I am from Texas, and, I go to New York to go to some of the fashion shows there. And I would tell myself, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be from LA.
Right.
And I've told myself a lot of stories over the years, over my entrepreneurial journey. And I've had to learn how to retell those stories and sort of integrate, maybe where I thought my life would be to where it is now. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your own journey. Like, were you telling yourself some stories that you've had to learn how to retrain your mind?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So my first week of law school, I love to tell this story. Here I am, like you said, Yale is legit. Most people don't know this because of Elle Woods, that Yale is actually the #1 law school, not Harvard. Thank you, Reese Witherspoon. And so
shout out to Yale, all of our Yale alumni out there.
Exactly. My very first week in this school, you're walking through these carved wood, hallowed halls of the Ivy League or whatever. And we were divided up into small groups so that you would have all your classes together. And there was this guy, Paul, and he said, "Oh, Mary, I'm going to have to miss class for these next 3 days. Would it be okay if I got your notes?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure thing. No, no problem, Paul. Like, is everything okay? Is something going on?" And he was like, "Oh, it's no big deal. I just have to go to DC because my grandfather's having a battleship named after him." And I was like, my grandma likes to play Battleship, but okay, that works. And so it was just kind of a very different world. There were definitely a few of us who had gone to state schools and had kind of more of a small town, local, this was the first really big thing we were doing kind of upbringing. But there were a lot of other people who were sort of groomed for this from being very, very little, and just had families who had a lot of money, and just very, very different experiences. But I think the coolest thing that taught me is kind of that idea of like, that theory of like, if you can treat regular people like they're celebrities and celebrities like they're regular people, then you can talk to anybody. And so being around people who had that upbringing, who, had way more than I did, and still finding common ground has been a huge service in our business, where we were often shooting weddings for people who had budgets that were, bigger than our annual income or whatever it might be. When you're booking a wedding where the flower budget is going to be $500,000 and you're going to watch them put that in garbage bags at the end of the night, you have to be able to find common grounds to still see people as human beings and what's that common humanity between us. There's this weird unspoken embarrassment when you do have an Ivy League education, which is kind of the opposite of that first week of being embarrassed of where I came from. You tend to say things like, "I went to school in New Haven," because you don't necessarily want to say, "I went to school at Yale." So it's kind of both sides, which is really interesting.
That's so funny because we have someone on our team who got her MBA at Harvard, and she'll say like, "I went to school in Boston." And I'm like, dude, I'm just going to own that for you right now because I'm really proud of you.
Yeah. Even that joke. And so photographers, if there are photographers listening to this, they're going to kind of roll their eyes because I say it every time. I went to Yale for law school, which is a really expensive way of becoming a wedding photographer. And the reason that I say that joke is because of that uncomfortableness of saying I went to Yale for law school, right? So it's like, let me immediately counter that.
Disqualify that, counter that.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I think you're also just not wanting, because we make assumptions about people based on where they went to school or whatever. So in a way, it's a disarming thing. So
totally.
I wonder what the percentage of people who were in your class did not end up going on to practice law. Probably pretty small.
Yeah, really, really small. So Yale in particular, you're going there either to teach. That's actually not many people know that. That's like the big career track for Yale is most of the professors at the top law firms, top law schools, either did their undergrad or their law school at Yale or one of the top three. Like, you really need to be pretty high up if you want to go into the education field. So a ton of professors, some politicians, and then a bunch of people who are at firms and just love it there. And for me, when I did a summer associateship, one in London, one in New York, 2 different law firms. And the London one, the first day during orientation said, "Oh my gosh, like the firm is so great. When you have to cancel your vacation to come back and work, they'll totally refund your trip." And I said, "If you think that's a selling point, we have a problem." And there's this competition of like people sleeping under their desks and who was working the most. And it was just a very intense culture. And I can remember my first week of law school, the dean of students saying, you will be at these law firms and you'll be working till 3 a.m, but you won't even notice it because you'll love what you do so much. You'll be in that state of flow. And I remember sitting there going, I will notice it. I will notice it if I'm working at a law firm until 3 a.m. But the crazy part is, as an entrepreneur, you totally find yourself working crazy hours and working probably a little too much, but you don't notice it because you do love it. So he was right about the idea, just not about the law firm.
It just wasn't being a lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that, because most people that go to Yale Law School are going to become lawyers, and here you invested years in education and finances, and then you meet your husband, and then you're deciding, I am actually not going to harness all of that hard work and grit towards becoming a lawyer. Where did you summon that courage, or was it kind of what you're saying? It was a realization that this wasn't in fact for me. Like, tell me a little bit more about that process.
Oh man, that's such a great way to ask that question too, because that word grit, like if you were to ask me what is the number one thing that entrepreneurs need, I think that's it right there, is that grit and tenacity kind of go hand in hand. And I think that for us, we had a couple things going for us. One of which is that we didn't have a house yet. We didn't have a mortgage. We were both coming from me being a student, and Justin was just assisting a big time advertising photographer for, like $15 an hour or something. So neither of us had gotten really comfortable or used to the fat paychecks. I think if I had gone to work for a year in the firm, it would have been much harder. If we'd gotten a mortgage, it would have been harder, not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but in a lot of ways, the fact that we were already poor students and hungry students, it kind of made it a little bit easier. And I think, there's like a Will Smith quote about like, nothing's going to teach you more about success than being hungry. And so we were really just like hungry to make it work. I think just kind of, to get a little bit deeper, probably, I have these kind of pinnacle turning point moments in my life where the thing that I'm doing seems a little insane at the moment, but it's kind of this out of body experience of, I just feel a piece of being called to do this. And for me, those moments are God. Absolutely. God saying, hey, Mary, I think you should take a year off before you take the LSAT, which resulted in me spending a year in England and having one of the best years of my life and making friends I still have to this day, who came over and they were in our wedding when we got married. A friend actually sending in my application to Yale Law School. I didn't send it in, right? That was kind of one of those, like, I didn't have so much a hand in it, but God had a plan. Going on Match.com, which I never thought I would do. And we're talking 14 years ago when you didn't talk about Match.com. But the very first person I met was Justin. And driving down to have coffee with him that first time, I thought, I should be worried that he might be a serial killer. I'm meeting a random person off the internet. But instead, I just felt this incredible peace. And it turned out to be my husband of the last coming up on 11 years this year. So I feel like starting our business was one of those, everybody else is going to think you're crazy. And maybe like on paper, you should be crazy. But I think those moments when you don't know how you're going to do it are the moments when God shows you that he's going to do it, that he's going to be the one who makes it happen.
Wow. That's awesome. Okay, so give me the timeline a little bit, because I think a lot of people, they compare, we both run successful gigs, and people easily compare their beginnings to our, endings. Not that we're ending by any sense of the word, but they already kind of see success. And I'm struggling with that even as I'm doing this podcast, because people automatically, you invite people onto podcasts that have had success. And yet I want to show people that messy middle. And I want to show people that it's not all of this magic, recipe formula. So take me through your timeline a little bit. And what would you consider sort of your first big break?
Oh gosh. Okay. So 2004 is a big pinnacle moment when I met Justin for coffee. And he doesn't drink coffee. So that's kind of when we first started. And so that was our first date. For our second date, we went hiking. And for our third date, I was like, show me your contracts and your pricing. Let's start building this business together, which was a super hot third date. It's kind of like not awesome. Really what you'd expect. But I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, and I also come from a long line of unsuccessful entrepreneurs. And so there is a very, You want to talk about stories we tell ourselves. There is a driving thread of core right down the middle of me that says over and over and over again, it is in your DNA to fail as a business. And so we have to wake up every day and prove that wrong. So and I think growing up poor, small town, like that mentality's there anyway. And so it's just every day, like chasing, like I always say, I run towards success because I'm running away from failure, basically. So that's kind of like when we got started. 2 more years together. I was only helping on the marketing and business side, never picked up the camera, was kind of afraid of the camera, thought I would make it explode if I touched it. And then when I graduated, right like that fall, let's say September, some more pinnacle moments. This is 2006. Justin's second shooter got the stomach flu, got sick, so I stepped in, fell in love with photography. And then we also went to our very first conference in Los Angeles called the Pictage Partner Conference. And we were like, we can do this. And so that was sort of that, Michael Gerber calls it your entrepreneurial seizure, where the world stops rotating, reverses, and starts again, like, where you can never imagine life again without picturing working for yourself. And so that's kind of when we got started. That's when we both just decided to go full time, probably having no business doing so. We didn't know really how to run a business. We didn't have like this crazy flood of inquiries. We didn't have a backup plan, but in some ways that really served us because those grit muscles and those tenacity muscles, whatever else we were lacking, we were jacked in those muscles. We had crazy
It's
grit.
like, you're committed when there's no plan B.
Yeah.
Yes. I think, and I know for me too, I say that courage cornered me.
Yeah.
And I think if you kind of force that upon yourself, like there's no plan B here, it does increase the hustle.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, like we do a lot of mentoring sessions, and sometimes there's just this part of me that wants to say, what would happen if I pushed you off the high dive board right now? Like, let's see if you can swim. I always kind of restrain myself because not everybody's created that way. And some people just, maybe the business will be more of a part-time thing, or they need to kind of gradually edge into it. But I think the people who truly have those kind of those stories you're talking about, like those just dig in and people look at it and go, wow, that's an example of success. In one way or another, we all have that, like, we're in this. We're not just in it, like, we're not just involved, we're committed. There's like this joke, nobody ever gets it. It's like the ham and eggs, like the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed or whatever. It's so terrible. Yeah, see, it's not that funny. Okay, that's great. But it's basically like this idea of like, do you have one foot, a toe, and kind of the shallow end, or are you really gonna, like you said, have no plan B and make it happen? And so from 2006 onward, we kind of just were building the business, growing pretty fast. We started speaking at the conferences. 2008, we launched our first real brand, like we hired somebody versus we played around in Photoshop kind of brand. And it just grew and grew and grew. 2008 was also the year we were given the opportunity to go around and speak to about 20 groups around the country of small photography pugs, Pictage user groups. And so that kind of really just started to train us in speaking and teaching. And we launched workshops in 2010 and wedding blogs in 2013. And we just sort of were building. But what I think is interesting about that story, to your question, is that we've spent 10 years becoming one of the bigger fish, certainly not the biggest, but one of the bigger fish in this world now, to only, like I was kind of mentioning when we first hopped on, that now I'm starting to kind of dip a toe or start stepping into a brand new world of being a writer and an author and speaking in that kind of world. And I feel in a lot of ways like that brand new beginner newbie starting over. And it's scary. It's scary to have rolled one boulder all the way up to the top of a mountain just to look around and go, oh, I kind of want a different mountain. So yeah, I have both.
Or a new mountain, right? Because that's kind of how I felt with this podcast. It's kind of my first thing. Like, I've been super myopic about growing Noonday Collection. I mean, intensely growing. Yeah. And starting this podcast has been, it's funny, it's called Going Scared because it's been a little bit of my going scared where I'm kind of stepping out. Our logo is a sun. So I'm like, I'm stepping out from behind my sun a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's also so fun. So tell me more about that. How are you going scared right now? Like, what are those things that are now stretching you? Because, you get to this point where you're like, experience brings a certain level of confidence.
Yeah.
And so you've experienced some success in very specific areas. You've got some confidence, and now you're sort of starting over again. So tell me about that process.
Yeah, that's totally true. And that's something that Justin reminds me of often is that the last 10 years, it's not like that slate is going to be wiped clean. Like the audience that we've built will follow us over to the next part. They didn't just follow us for the photography. I mean, some of them did, but we've also been really intentional for just sharing our own story, and people have known that writing was a part of it all along. And so it's not like we're going to start over. We'll have some of the audience come over and we'll just have a ton of lessons learned, stuff we're learning with like newsletters and like social media and digital marketing and stuff we've learned just about making a business out of an art or things like that. All of that's going to cross over. And I do think you're right that there is just this kind of like track record that when you can look back on and go, okay, we never knew how to do that before either, but it worked out. And we never knew how to do that either. And maybe that flopped, but we learned something, right? Or like we failed at that, but it didn't kill us. And so I feel like the longer that you can do this, the more experiences you can draw from of just like the world didn't end when we were scared and we went anyway. And either it was one of the biggest successes we've ever had came out of that, or the best, lessons learned. And either way, that's a win.
That's so true. I love hearing how you really have a heart to pour into other people and that so much of your career was built through beginning to teach and become educators. I'd love to hear a little bit, like, what's your pulse when you talk to these newer entrepreneurs that are just stepping out? What do you feel like are some of the things that you're like have on repeat right now in all of your mentoring calls?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, Justin is the part of our duo who truly is a photographer. Like I say there are people who do photography and there are people who just are photographers. It's just some of the time they have a camera in their hand, but they're photographers all the time. And that's Justin. On that first date, we're walking around and he's like, look at the light on the building. And I'm like, hello, I'm right here. But so for me, where photography is his art, building businesses is mine. That's the thing that sets me on fire, like, head to toe chills, like that adrenaline, that state of flow is building businesses. And so I think the reason that I'm so driven by that, and I always tell people, whether it's a workshop or a mentoring session or whatever it is when I want to talk about building your business, I think you would expect the kind of tables we're going to talk about are going to be graphs and charts and profit analysis. And we'll get to that. But the truth is the table I'm most worried about is your kitchen table, because I was the kid who grew up watching my parents fight over that kitchen table, or, just completely buckle and bend and break under the weight of trying to make a go of their business as the phone on the wall. Remember phones on walls?
Yes.
As the phone on the wall is ringing off the hook because there are more bills to pay than money coming in. And just this one specific day watching my dad, this giant Paul Bunyan of a logger, bend, buckle, and break and start crying under the weight of knowing that there were all these bills due and no way to make it happen. And like 2 weeks after that, the bank came and took our logging trucks. And I'm not talking about like F-150s. I'm talking about 18-wheeler Mack and Kenworth trucks.
Wow.
And how small he looked as they drove further and further away. And so when I want to build somebody's business, I'm doing it. I'm not speaking or teaching to that person. I'm speaking or teaching to their spouses and their kids, because I know that we can make generational change happen if we can get right with the living and the life part of doing what you love. And so that's really what sets me on fire is how will your kids be affected by you chasing this dream? What will they see happen? Can they witness you chasing a dream, making huge change in the world, making your business not just about yourself, but about serving others, which you have done an incredible job of, and also see that you were able to do it in a way that was not just enough for you guys to get by, but enough to give back to make real change in the world.
Wow.
So that's kind of the drive for that.
That is so awesome. I mean, I struggled so much, even though my business is a social business and has a direct impact on vulnerable people around the world. I was so worried my first few years that I was doing it at the expense of my family and of my children. And I remember someone saying to me about 3 years in that I needed to cast vision to my family, that this wasn't just a me thing, it was a we thing.
Yes.
And so I started just to incorporate a lot more of my life into what we talked about at the dinner table. Even last night, we're like, so what's coming up in y'all's weeks? And I'm like, well, I've got 3 podcast interviews. Here's who I'm interviewing. And they're like, well, tell me about them. And now they really understand. And it was when my daughter was about 6 years old. And this is when I'd been on the struggle bus thinking like, oh my gosh, am I just failing as a mom because I'm doing this, entrepreneur thing? And I was putting her to bed one night and she just said, Mommy, I'm so glad that you started Noonday Collection, because if you wouldn't have started Noonday, our family wouldn't be able to do all the things we can do now. And not only is Noonday helping other people, but it's helping our family.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, like I am doing this business not at the expense of my family, but for their flourishing as well. And
Yes.
so I love that you are being so holistic in not just speaking to like, here's how to be successful as a photographer, but speaking to the whole person, because
Yeah.
that's what's going to create long-term vision and longevity and tenacity and grit that's actually going to last through the long
Yeah.
haul.
Totally. And I think that the way that we grow up can have such this, like, it becomes this suitcase that we pack up and we bring with us of how we relate to success and to money, maybe in particular. And so we have a business course, and one of the like big weeks we teach on is like just really like let's identify some relationships you have with money and where those come from. And so for me growing up, there was a definite mentality in that area generally, but also specifically from my dad of you are either a good person or you are a rich person, and the two shall
Mm.
never be the same. And it wasn't until I was in college and the scholarship I got to go to England for a year was from the Rotary Club in Morgantown. And so here are these, small business owners, these entrepreneurs, these business people who have built businesses that not only provide for their families, but have done well enough that they can create a fund that annually produces a scholarship that changes the life of a kid coming out of West Virginia. And so I get to go and speak to like 30 or 40 clubs in all over England, telling them about this place that I grew up in, why I love it, and why it's like unlike anything that they've probably ever experienced before, but there might have been some stereotypes about. And I get to be this kind of representation of like, you might start small, but there's no limit to the things you can go do. And that's because there were people who did well in their businesses who decided to change other people's lives with it. So that was the first example I had of you can do well. And it can be not only like despite that, you can help other people, but because of it in some cases.
I love that. Definitely when my eyes were first opened to global poverty, I went through a very judgmental phase where it was like, oh my gosh, you own a designer bag, like you're going to hell. Because it was like, there are people dying out there.
Right.
But when I was about 21, I went to a small retreat with a guy named Richard Foster, and he wrote this book called Celebration of Discipline. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, Jessica, never scorn the rich and never glorify the poor. Just be like Mother Teresa, whether she was cleaning up after a leper who had just been sick or whether she was in the White House. She just walked in the spirit. And that had such a profound impact on me on not creating assumptions about people and about money and about where people grew up, but just walking the spirit. And I lived overseas for a couple of years and I had to raise my own salary. And I raised my own salary by going to big fancy balls where I grew up and asking for money from people.
Yeah. Right.
So God uses all the things. Okay. So I just read a blog post of yours and it really resonated with me because you talk about how we sometimes as entrepreneurs can create this composite, like super entrepreneur in our minds that we're never going to be able to live up to.
Yes.
And so one quote really stuck out to me where you say, if you waste all of your energy running left and running right, just trying to keep up with what everyone else is doing, all you end up is really tired and never once moving forward.
Yeah.
So how do we fight against that?
Oh man, that's like, if we can figure that out on this podcast, let's just go retire.
Let's do it. We'll go beyond 30 minutes. Let's do it.
No, I love it. I love it so much. So that quote, there is this, I know this is like 7th grade physical science coming back or something. There is this kind of energy that atoms will exert. It's called frenetic energy. And I don't think that it's any coincidence that frenetic sounds a lot like frenzied and frantic, because frenetic energy is literally the energy an atom will expend to vibrate left and vibrate right just to maintain its position in space where it stays. And I feel like as business owners, we do that so much. And like when we find ourselves getting too deep in comparison or being a little too close to people who pull that out of us, you can almost feel that. Like your heart starts to beat at that kind of like frenetic. Like you feel like just sort of like shaking your hands in front of it, like, oh, like calm down, it's going to be okay. And we start to feel like, oh man, I need to chase the ball over here. We always call this like the kindergartners playing basketball approach to business, right? So it's like, how do they don't play zones in kindergarten basketball. It's like the ball runs over there and everybody chases it. And the ball runs over there and everybody chases it. And we can get so caught up in doing that. I mean, even this morning on my Insta story, I had seen a few people posting about this new social media, Vero, and that whatever, the first few people who signed up were going to get it for lifetime for free. So I was like, I guess I'll go sign up and I'll lock it in or whatever. And I did a little post on it, and within like the next 30 minutes there were like 25 other people who I'm friends with who were on it. And I just started thinking to myself, I just joined this because I thought, hey, maybe everybody's doing it, and they all probably just joined it because they saw me or somebody else post about it, and we're all chasing the Vero ball right now. We're still doing it. Every single dang day you can catch yourself doing this. And I'm just sitting here hoping that like 3 years from now, somebody's not listening to this podcast going, that was like the first day of Instagram or whatever, because I'm like, Vero, whatever that is. And so it's something you have to constantly come back to center and check yourself on and ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm walking in my specific calling, I'm walking in my gifts, I'm walking in the thing that makes me different? We always teach our business course people, what can you do to make yourself a market of one? What is that? Embracing that thing that makes you different rather than running left, running right. Like, what if, just to keep the visual going, instead of ever taking a step left or right into somebody else's lane at what they're good at, you took every one of those steps forward, and just imagine how much further down the track you'll be. And that's so great in theory, but it requires some pretty heavy. I have a goals coach named Kim from the White Boardroom, Kim Butler, and she talks about having foundational disciplines that allow you to go do the growing goals. And so, maybe it's limiting your screen time, or maybe it's unfollowing people who only pull out that my heart is frantic, my heart is racing feeling. But we have to be so, so diligent in guarding our hearts and guarding our energy. And there have been a few key times, talking about pinnacle moments in mine and Justin's business where we have unfollowed people in real life and online. And we did that because we realized they were just that kind of like group that pulled out that frenetic energy in each other and in us. And the second that we did, it was like we suddenly had all this energy. We felt like we just rocket boosted forward because we weren't wasting it on stuff that doesn't ultimately matter. And the other thing I'll add to that is that if you're constantly trying to go do what somebody else has done, it's never going to have, this is so important. Everybody listening to this, please, if you hear nothing else, hear this. It's never going to have the same impacts for you as it did for them because it's already been done. That doesn't mean that just because something has happened, you can't ever do it. Just because a podcast exists, it doesn't mean that this podcast isn't going to be the one that changes people's lives. It's just that if you're only doing it because you think you have to, or you're only having a blog because you think you have to, or you're only joining Vero because you think you have to, when we get off track of doing that stuff we're being called to daily, I think is when we get in trouble.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And you will just burn out. Like if you're doing something to just chase the next thing, or because someone else is doing it, or because you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, you're just going to burn out and fry. And it's interesting because when I started Noonday, I actually didn't struggle with comparison because I was just hair on fire. I was like so busy chasing after this new thing, and I didn't feel like anyone else was doing it. And I was like, competition? What? I don't have competition. Like, I'm like doing the coolest thing ever. And I think it was after the business grew and the stakes felt higher that staying intentional, like what you're saying, guarding your heart and staying intentional to not looking into the right and to the left, that has required a lot more diligence, as now I actually have something significant to lose,
Right.
But I love just saying this requires diligence. Like it doesn't just happen to you. You actually have to say, it's funny because my daughter listened to some of my new podcasts over the weekend, and I had talked about how I let my kids hide my phone from me in the evening.
Yes.
But I'd gotten out of that habit. So let's just say I've been doing a little bit more scrolling than normal when I say I'm not. And that's something else. I think we can have this like aspirational values, but then like, what's the reality? And so she was definitely checking my reality. She's like, Mom, you've been scrolling at night. And I'm like, okay, you can start hiding my phone again. Yeah. But it does take diligence.
Yeah. And I think what's so cool about what you said with, when you first started Noonday and your hair was on fire and like you were living in that place that the dean of the law school talked about, but not about law firms, of just like the hours are passing by and you are like so living in the thing you were created to do that time like stops existing, and other people like maybe having like a competitive piece in it. It just all stops existing because you're living so strong in what you were uniquely created to do. And I think we, as human beings, and the grass is greener complex, we want to get away sometimes from the thing we were created to do. So it's kind of like that idea of like, I don't want to be a member of any club who would have me, right? It's like, for Justin and I, for example, one of the things like we hear over and over and over from our audience is, oh, you're black and whites. Oh, you're black and white photos. Oh, you're black and white photos. And so as a human being, what's the reaction? It's like, well, why don't you like my color photos as much? You know what I'm saying? And so if you'll listen to your audience, for you guys who are building a business, listen to your audience. They will tell you, they will really start to help kind of hold that mirror up in front of you and tell you the things that you're uniquely shining in. And it's almost the things that you like, this weird thing takes over and you almost feel like you don't have to try. Kind of like, I'll just like throw together like a caption on Instagram sometimes and I won't even really think too much about what I'm writing. And people will say, that was for me today. Like that hit me right where I needed it. And it's like, when I lean into that stuff, that kind of almost comes like without thinking too hard about it, without overthinking it, without saying, well, I need to be more like how that person is doing. If we can take all of the energy and just really like push it into those things that we're gifted in, I feel like that, it's like that idea of, can you go from a 9 to a 10 versus from going from like a 4 to a 6? Can you really lean into just developing the things you're most gifted at?
I love that. That reminds me, I was recently hearing Simon Sinek talk about, he wrote that Reason for Why. And he said, sit a friend down and ask that friend, why are you friends with me?
Ooh, dang.
And then ask that friend, okay, well, but, and they might say things like, well, you're just really cool and we get along so well. And it's like, no, but what makes me uniquely? And it ends up, they get into specific attributes about you that are really adding value to their life. And that's the beginning of finding your why. And so I love this idea of looking at our audience and listening to them, because they are speaking to us. They are saying, here's this unique place of how you're adding value to my life. And sometimes it comes so naturally for us. You're right. We're constantly like trying to compare or do what someone else is doing instead of just honing in on what we're already really good at doing and how we're already impacting people. So I love that. I love that activity that you just talked about.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but for me, when we were coming of age in our business, as it were, I am a full-blown introvert. Like I can turn it on at a conference, I can do the talk or whatever it might be, but then I'm going to go be in my pajamas with risotto room service and chocolate cake for a couple of hours, and nobody talks to me. And so we sort of came up in our industry at a time when all the speakers and the leaders were like the full-blown, super bubbly extroverts, like really loud, really high energy. And I told myself stories. I love that question, by the way. I told myself stories for years that because I was a quiet voice, that voice didn't matter. Or because I wasn't, bubbly and like, I don't know, having catchphrases or whatever it might be, that I was never going to reach that kind of success. And in fact, it turned out that was the very thing that drew our most loyal tribe to us, is that a lot of them are introverts, but even if they're not, they just appreciate that our voice in the industry is the kind of voice that you have to lean into to hear versus just always trying to be the loudest person in the room. And so over time, I always say swagger wins in the short term, but only in the short term. Over time, it's the people who lean in and listen who are going to be the ones who win.
I really needed my notebook out to take notes. I'm so excited this is a podcast because I can actually go back and re-listen to it and take notes. Yes. Tell us how we can find you if we want to be more engaged with your message.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Mary Marantz on Instagram, I'd say that's where most of the updates are happening. I do a lot with Insta stories and on the posts. I'm also actually at Mary Marantz on Vero as of this morning. We'll see. Time will tell if that's a thing or not.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So now I'm like, gosh. Oh, great. I got to go do something else. No, stop it.
No, you don't. You just have to run in your path.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I think it might have it's got a lot of bugs right now because it's brand new. So I think it might Well, time will tell. That's all we'll say. But then Justin and Mary blog is probably the second best place to find us. I do a lot of business posts and just being an entrepreneur posts over there. And Facebook/Justin and Mary.
Awesome. Well, this has been so much fun. I love talking to fellow entrepreneurs, and especially entrepreneurs who are giving back and pouring into those who are just starting out. This was such a great podcast for those people. And thanks a lot, Mary. We'll see you over on Insta Story.
Yes.
I'm excited.
Thank you so much for having me.
Such a great conversation. I recently heard from a listener who's also a Noonday ambassador and a soon-to-be TEDx speaker, Katya Holland. Katya shared with me her own story of grit, and I could not resist but share it with you guys. Here's Katya's story. She writes, "You know those people who don't have to study to get an A, or the people who are magically good at any sport they try, or the people who just seem to walk around with life unfolding so easily before them? Yep, that's not me. You know that old football movie, Rudy, where the main character is in love with Notre Dame football and will give anything to be a part of the team? Except for that Rudy is from Illinois and lacks all that is needed to make the team. He's got no money, terrible grades, and he's 5'6". But Rudy wants to play for Notre Dame so badly. So he wills his way from a junior college to Notre Dame. Then he wills his way onto the practice football team where his body is used for hitting practice. And eventually, after years of trying his absolute hardest, he wills his way onto the official football team. And in the last game of his senior year, Rudy made one official play for Notre Dame football before his teammates whisked him off the field in celebration. This is more like me. I'm the person who has never really been good at anything, but tries anyway. Growing up, I was ashamed that I had to try so hard at everything. I was always amazed that other people didn't have to put in the work, and yet we magically arrived at the same place. To see something on the horizon and walk toward it, even though nothing says that the road to the horizon will be easy, it's a gift. My parents are the ones who gave me that gift. My mom immigrated from Mexico with her family when she was about 6 years old. As a child, her entire family would pile into the bed of a truck with only a tarp to protect them from the elements and drive from the southernmost tip of Texas to Wisconsin to go pick beets and cucumbers. They'd live in a one-bedroom house with dirt floors. And while her parents would work in the fields as a 6-year-old, she'd care for her infant brother. As a teenager, she'd go to school and after school would clock in at the local grocery store, working until 11 p.m. most nights. My dad, he started working with his dad at age 11. During the summer, he would work at a farm co-op from 7 in the morning until 8 every single night. He would weigh trucks carrying tomatoes, tally up tickets for farmers, and even call out-of-the-state truckers and place orders. He did this every summer until he turned 25, all the while going to school and helping his mom open a flower shop. On June 12, 1983, at the ages of 24 and 25, my parents were married. And since it was the middle of tomato season, they didn't go on a honeymoon. They were married on a Saturday and both returned to work the following Monday. A few months later, with the support of their families, my mom and dad started their own business, beer corner stores. Eventually, these corner stores morphed into wine and liquor stores. And today, my folks have been in business 35 years, own 9 stores, and have been able to employ and create opportunity for thousands of families. As newlyweds, when my parents needed a weekend to themselves, they would make the 5-hour road trip from the Rio Grande Valley to Austin. They would pack up their small red truck with koozies and stop at convenience stores along the way, selling their wares. That was their weekend spending money. My heart has always beamed with pride with who I come from and where I come from. And while to some people failure is not an option, for me, not trying is not an option. My parents, entirely by their actions, taught me how to dig in and put one foot in front of the other. I've never been naturally good at anything, except maybe eating ice cream. But somehow I've put one foot in front of the other and willed myself into a speaking and writing career, loving on women and reminding them of their innate worth. I went from a career in hospitality to writing a blog, to trying to write a book, to actually publishing a book, to getting all sorts of amazing praise for the book, and even to being invited to speak at TEDx in May. And none of this came all of a sudden. It's all because of God's grace. It all came because my parents taught me how to walk towards something with purpose. And it all came because I've never been afraid to try. There's honor in seeing something on the horizon and doing your best to get there. Ladies and gentlemen, what are you trying this week? Don't focus on failure. Focus on the try. Don't tell yourself a story about where you came from. Tell yourself a story about where you're going. Can't wait to see you next week. Thanks so much for joining me on the Going Scared podcast today. If you like what you heard in this episode, be sure and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and leave a review so other people will join the conversation. If you'd like some behind the scenes looks at my life as a CEO, a mom, and a courage catalyzer, be sure to follow along on Facebook and on Instagram at Jessica Honegger, Honegger. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.